Our guest is Dennis Van Roekel. He's the president of the National Education Association and spent 23 years in the classroom as a math teacher in Arizona. Recently, he established the Commission on Effective Teachers and Teaching to examine the policies and practices of the teaching profession. Dennis, good to sit and chat with you once again.
Dennis, it's good to be here.
And we thank you, the NEA, for your support.
You bet.
This is our annual conversation. I always ask the same question. How are we doing with public education in America? What grade would you give us, and what would you say, these are successes, this is where we need to improve?
I think the biggest story in public education today is we've had a very difficult 2 years. The economic crisis, it hit everyone in every phase, and it really did hit education. We lost literally 250,000 adults from the working in schools, and when those adults leave, the kids are all still there. And so the consequences were severe. Higher class size, elimination of programs that some kids really did need. So it's been a tough 2 years, but on the plus side is I just cannot believe the passion, the commitment that these educators bring to the class every single day. And that part never really changes. They just keep doing it.
We have been celebrating Teacher Appreciation Week, National Teacher Day. What do teachers want? What do they need? What do they deserve?
One of them they want to be able to do is just go in their classroom and use their creativity and give kids what they need. They are really insulted by someone handing them a script or trying to manage their time minute by minute, because that's not what works in the classroom. I was a high school math teacher for 23 years. You've got to be able to grab that moment, that teachable moment, and it's not, maybe it doesn't come on schedule, and maybe it didn't happen third period, but it happened fourth period. You've got to be able to do that. They want that. They want time to prepare adequately. They want smaller class size so they can pay the individual attention. But on this National Day of Recognition of Teachers, the other thing is, it's really nice when somebody says thank you. Yeah.
And respect is so important. And people, you know, I've read the articles, and teachers really should be on the level of firemen and policemen and people who make such a huge contribution to this country.
You know, when I grew up, public service was really held up. That wherever you worked in the public, giving back to your community in public service. And they often called it being a public servant.
Yep.
And nowadays it seems that some are attacking that, and I think that's wrong. When I look at the teaching force across this country, many of them are first generation college attendees. Many of them are they're educators' children, and they understand the power of what that is, and they didn't go in it to become extremely wealthy. But they believe in doing something that matters in their life, and they believe helping children get to their dream is worth the effort.
Turn the clock back when you were a teacher in Arizona, and what was that like to step into the classroom?
Oh gosh. You know, one of the great things about teaching is that you have such distinct beginnings and endings each school year.
Yes.
And I was always amazed. I might have a student the next year, and they had changed and grown up 5 years over the summer. I mean, they just grow and mature so rapidly. So the first day of school, absolutely, was the coolest day every year. Because there are new ones, and there are repeats from that you had a different class year before, but they've changed. It's just finding 160 new faces in your room every year. That's...
Whoa. Let's go back to the point that we opened with. And I want to know about, even though it's been a couple of tough years, what do you figure are the accomplishments and what needs improvement in public education?
Well, one of the challenges in front of us that is really an opportunity also are the Common Core standards. 46 states plus the District of Columbia. What that is it's not a federal mandate. It was 46 states coming together and say, let's define what we believe in the 21st century all kids ought to know and be able to do. And that's a huge accomplishment. Now the challenge is implementing those well. We've got a second generation of assessments, as they're calling them, to measure whether or not students have achieved those standards. But the implementation, for classroom teachers to not only have the professional development to know exactly what the standards are, but then to develop how they're going to teach subjects and content so that students can learn those. You know, that's the challenge in choosing curriculum. If I know exactly what I want my student to know or be able to do, now I've got to find a way to teach that they understand, and I've got to find multiple ways, because one way doesn't work for all students.
Yeah, I was going to say, then we're back to that innovation thing in the classroom, creativity in the classroom. So we got the core now. Now you want to pass that along to the teacher, huh?
That's right. We know the Common Core standards. We know what we want every child to learn. And when they're not there, that's the creative part and the difficult part about teaching. How do we get every student there? And in the 21st century, we can't leave some out. What the phrase now is career and college ready. We need to be able to do that for every student. Poverty is not an excuse, but we have to figure out, what do we do to combat the effects of poverty so that every child can succeed?
Take a little break. Back on the other side, we're talking with Dennis Van Roekel. He is the president of the National Education Association. And of course, that is the biggest, I think, union in the country, 3 million plus folks. We'll take a little break. Back on the other side. This is America and the World. This is America is brought to you by the National Education Association, the nation's largest advocate for children and public education. The Republic of Kazakhstan in the heart of Eurasia. A rich history, a culture of hospitality, and a future of development and growth. The U.S.-China Education Trust and the F.Y. Chang Foundation. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings. Dennis, I read an article recently talking about this business of comparing U.S. education with education in other countries around the world. And it came out that even though some countries were up there, but when you put everybody else in the pack, we're doing pretty well.
Yeah, we're in about the middle.
And what do you say are the facts? What are the myths?
Well, the PISA, the Program for International Assessment of Students, the thing that I think is so important for us to pay attention to, we're in about the middle of the industrialized country. However, if you take all students in America who attend schools where there is less than 10% poverty, we're number one in the world, better than the Finns, better than anyone. What that says is, in our country, we obviously have to strive for excellence, but there is a huge equity gap, and we need to attack that. The equity issue is our biggest challenge.
And what does that mean, equity in education?
So, for example, in communities where there's high poverty, we don't have the same quality of teachers that we have in other places.
Why is that so?
Well, one of the things that happens is it's a difficult place to teach. We see a turnover, a revolving door. Teachers are there 1 or 2 years. Principals are there 1 or 2 years. That is not the way to success. Okay. We don't have the same kind of resources available to them. And so we have many absolutely incredibly fantastic teachers in those settings, but there aren't enough of them. And even when you're great, if you're only there 1 or 2 years, we've got to find a way to make sure that we have an equitable distribution. They don't have anywhere near the resources in terms of technology and other things. So it's equity of opportunity if you want equity in results.
So I read an article also which said that 43% of Latino youngsters and 38% of African American youngsters are going to schools that they're less than 10% white. That's kind of like segregation all over again, isn't it?
That's absolutely true. And the sad part to me about the teaching profession is the teaching profession is not getting more diverse. It needs to. It's really important and powerful in an education setting that students see teachers who look like them. Not all of them. Obviously, they need to see the diversity that they see outside.
Right.
And so that's a really important part of recruiting new people into the teaching profession.
How do you go about, well, it's not just a question of rich and poor or urban and suburban, is it?
No.
Or help me understand that.
I think
a
what
poor
it is,
school is a poor school in a poor neighborhood. Huh?
See, I think you start with the students. You focus on the students and say, if they're not succeeding, what do we believe is holding them back?
Okay.
And then then you immediately go to, how do we provide that? One of the things that they do where there is a lot of success is they provide a lot of health services. People don't realize how health impacts education. One of the number 1 and 2 causes of absenteeism in elementary school is dental health care and asthma. Both of those, if treated and taken care of, you can resolve. But kids miss more school for those 2 things than any other factor.
You know what I was also thinking? If kids go to school hungry, they're not going to be able to learn.
You're absolutely right.
They can't.
And in many cities now, and we have a subsidiary called the Health Information Network, creating breakfast programs for kids, huge difference, because you're absolutely right. If you're sitting there hungry, you're not focusing on learning.
So a school in a poor area is not having, as you say, the necessary resources, but you also mentioned the quality of the teachers.
The turnover,
The turnover. But then the other thing that I'm thinking about is parental involvement. And let's put it right out on the table. If in a poor society where maybe the parents, a single parent, maybe the parent hasn't gone to much past high school, they're out working 2 jobs trying to raise the kid. The grandmother, who's early 40s, is taking care of the kids. The environment is not there for them to have that support. Huh?
That's right. And so one of the best investments we could make to assist those kids is early childhood education. Early childhood for 3 and 4-year-olds. It's interesting. Finland is held up as the number 1 country in the world on these international assessments. They weren't always number 1. In the 90s, they had about 46% of their kids in early childhood. Now they have 96%.
Whoa.
And what a difference it has made. There is no single investment of using tax resources that will give you a better return than early childhood. That's because I often say it's like the kids have a narrowed curriculum growing up. There is no family of means in America that denies all those opportunities for kids when they're young, if they have the resources. Why would we deny it for other kids? The opportunity to try music, to soccer, athletics, all of these different programs, they need to have that too. And they need to have the programs that starts teaching them things at a very early age. Little kids are like sponges. They'll learn whatever you're willing to sit down and teach them.
Every 5-year-old, just the only word in their vocabulary is why.
Oh, yes.
They want to know why.
And they're naturally curious.
Yeah.
Have you ever watched a 2-year-old?
You're talking about putting them in an environment where they can ask why.
Yes, a rich learning environment.
Yeah.
Hand them a cell phone and they'll start playing with it at age 2. They want to know how to work this thing.
Right.
And we need to provide those opportunities to satisfy that curiosity and that learning.
How do you go about, using tests, standardized? They've gone too far, I'm sure, in your mind, to evaluate how a school is doing, how students are doing. What's fair, what's reasonable?
What doesn't work is a high-stakes standardized test that's given once a year. It doesn't give you the information you need. What we do need in testing is a system that gives good feedback both to the student and to the teacher. As a
What
class,
would that look like?
well, I always think about when I was teaching.
Yeah.
In 23 years, don't think teachers are anti-test. I never went a week without giving a test or a quiz. But the purpose of those tests were to determine what my students know and what they didn't know. And so I had to figure out a way to make sure they learned that. It helped students. Then they figured out what they didn't know and what they had to learn. So it's the feedback from a testing system that provides you the information you need for students to do better and for me to teach what they don't yet understand.
Wow. How do you, so now we're talking about evaluating schools and evaluating students. What seems to be fair and what seems to be working, evaluating teachers?
It's interesting in Finland and Singapore, the places that are number 1 in the world, they don't use high-stakes standardized tests at all. That should tell us something, that those who are doing the best aren't doing going in the direction we are. So what does work? What they do is they establish learning goals in schools, and teachers work collaboratively to make sure that every student reaches those. That's the secret. It's not testing, it's providing the avenues for people to work together to figure out what it is students need to know and then determining a plan to make that happen.
Is that the teachers working together?
Yeah, absolutely. They provide far more time for teachers to work collaboratively to plan lessons and instruction so that they can make sure that kids get it. We don't do that in this country anywhere near to the extent that these other countries do.
When we were up in New York a couple of years ago at the International Summit on the teaching profession, we talked with the ministers of education from Finland and also Singapore, as I recall. And they talked about attracting the very best teachers into the profession and then giving the teachers a lot of support to continue to learn. That seems to be key, and that seems to be something that Obama's kind of put in focus for himself, huh?
As I listened to them and they described it, we pay a lot of attention to individualized compensation. Who should be paid more than someone else? That's not where they focus. They see compensation as undergirding the whole system of teachers. So what they do is every 3 to 5 years, they make an analysis to determine what would you make in a private sector job, something that would require similar education. And they want to make sure that going into teaching is similar to these other professions. They have so many people wanting to go into teaching that they only choose somewhere around 8 to 12% of those who apply. And it's because they made the profession attractive. It's equitable in pay with others, so you don't say, I'd love to go into teaching, but that's one of the things they do. The second thing, you said it, once you get into teaching, they provide incredible support for you to ensure your success. I was in a setting where the Minister of Education from Finland was there. Somebody said, what do you do about incompetent teachers in Finland? He said, we don't have any. And the audience kind of chuckled. And he said, no, I'm serious. And his point was, we won't let you in the classroom until you are adequately trained and certified in that subject area. Then we let you in, and then we provide you support to get better. That's the model we need in this country.
You know what it just triggered in my mind was when I graduated from Catholic University, I wanted to stay in Washington, so I got a couple of part-time jobs as teachers in Northeast, in schools in Northeast, and I was terrible. I had no training at all. I was a couple of years older than some of the kids in the class, and I learned a few tricks of the trade during that first year. The second year, when I was over in Anacostia, I think I did a fairly decent job. But it was a year of making a lot of mistakes that trained me to do a better job in the second year.
We very much believe that in a training program, it ought to be clinically based, meaning before you're teacher of record, you ought to spend time in a classroom to learn those tricks, as we call them, under the guidance of a really strong, experienced teacher. We don't want people to fail. It's wrong for the students, number one, but also we lose too many people because they want to do a good job and they feel that they're not. We lose 47% of all teachers hired in America within 5 years.
Oh, no.
You know, when I say that to business leaders, they said, if I had a division in my corporation with even a 10% turnover, I'd be down there saying, what's wrong? And so to me, if you lose 47% in the first 5 years, there's something wrong with your training, recruitment, and hiring system. We need to fix that. I believe we ought to raise the standards for getting in. I think we ought to make sure you're licensed and certified. And when we were talking about schools in poverty, some of those are really great teachers, and they're put in fields where they're not certified. I'm a high school math teacher. I think I did a pretty good job. If you put me in a music class, a history class, a poetry class, that's not my field. And that happens way too often in schools in high poverty areas. It's not that the teachers are bad or they're put in places where they're not trained in that subject area, and that's wrong.
Well, there was something I read about a lawsuit. Some teachers in Florida are going up against this idea of evaluation because they're being evaluated not only on subjects that they don't even teach, they're being evaluated on students that are in a whole different school.
I'm very familiar with that lawsuit. We filed it.
Oh, you filed the lawsuit?
The NEA along with our state affiliate.
I didn't know that.
It's really crazy. I'll give you the one
That's
example.
teacher evaluation, right? Gone wrong.
Absolutely. There are 7 teachers that are plaintiffs. One of them is a second grade teacher. A year ago, she was teacher of the year in her building, and this year she got an unsatisfactory evaluation. And 50% of that evaluation is based on student test scores of students in an elementary school down the road. She's never seen nor met them. One of them is a high school calculus teacher who's being 50% of his evaluation is based on the reading scores on a test by 9th and 10th graders. Now, most people look at me and say, that can't be true. And I go, it is. And it's wrong. That kind of use of test scores to, quote, evaluate teachers is simply wrong, and it doesn't make sense. And these are high stakes decisions. It has to do with transfer and promotion. It has to do with compensation starting next fall. And it has to do whether or not you retain your employment. If you get two of those in a year, two unsatisfactory in a row, you could be dismissed. You could be dismissed from your profession because of test scores taken by students you've never met nor seen.
No, that's insanity.
Absolutely.
That's absolutely insanity. So I want to introduce a couple of things because we have about 3 or 4 minutes left in our conversation. I want to talk about technology.
Yeah.
How that's going to benefit the students and how it's going to benefit the teachers.
I think the first thing on technology that we need to think about is a phrase we often use about reading material, age appropriate.
Okay.
There's a big difference between a 25-year-old taking a course online or through technology and a 5 or 6-year-old. And we have to think about what's appropriate for that student. It's an equity issue there also. People assume that technology is the great equalizer. Sometimes that's true. But it's not true if at my house I have a dial-up and you have high-speed internet. It's not the same if I have access to good hardware and you don't. And I have access to support mechanisms to fix it when it's broken and you don't. So we need to make sure that's true. We need to, what we believe is the blended is the best, that especially in the, if I'm talking K-12, where in a classroom you combine both technology and online learning with what's going on in the classroom. That way you get the benefits of both worlds, and students' learning, it seems to be really enhanced by that experience.
How about the teachers? Some of them have to learn the technology,
Absolutely.
right?
It's very different teaching
And
an
you have to have
online course.
You have to have a time set aside to teach the teachers.
Well, there's a lot of technology. I mean, when the first time I went in the classroom and watched a whiteboard demonstration, I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know how to do that.
Yes, yes.
And there is professional development, as it is in almost every occupation in the world. The only thing that makes education different is we don't give it to them as part of their job. I asked a teacher once who had this new, I was impressed with this smartboard. I said, how did you learn to do all this? Did the district provide you training? She said, no. I came in every day over the summer to learn it on my own. That's not the way to run a system.
Well, that's also like hearing the teachers going out and buying the supplies that they need out of their own pockets because they want to help the students get educated.
I think the secret is simple. I think we start with a student. We look at a student and say, what does that individual child need in every school in America in order to succeed in the 21st century? And then you start identifying the obstacles that keep them from achieving that, and the adults in the system figure out how to remove the obstacle from the student's learning. Start with the student, determine the obstacles, develop a plan to remove them. That's the secret. Not very complicated. So one of those is, for example, is early childhood. We know that if kids come to school at age 5 and they're already, quote, way behind, what do you do to correct that? You provide free preschool for kids who need that opportunity.
I would imagine the sequester business is hurt as well.
Yeah, across the board cuts, you know, you can't determine where it should come. So what happens are kids who need it the most, Head Start, some of these kids, they're being cut. Crazy part of this was the furloughs they were going to do to our military bases across the country. Here are kids, mom and dad are in the military, and you're going to furlough the teachers? That is the last thing they need.
I was thinking that a good education up through the end of high school would be either to prepare the kid for college, prepare the kid for more training, or to go out and get a job that is meaningful in today's society. But, my Lord, the cost of a college the tuition today, through the roof.
Yeah, for the last 30 years, tuition has totally outpaced inflation. And what I fear most, one thing we can do is to make sure loans are available, but you don't want to saddle kids with a debt. The starting salary average starting salary in Alabama is $28,000 for a teacher.
Woo.
And the average debt of new teachers coming in is $20,000. How do you start a career that way? We've got to figure out a way to bring the cost down, or college will become only for those who have resources, a lot of resources, and those who are very, very bright and can get a scholarship. People like me won't make it.
We are at the end of our time. Thank you for the education, Dennis. Thank you very much.
Appreciate
Thank you. For information about my new book, The Chance of a Lifetime, and online video for all This Is America programs, visit our website, thisisamerica.net. And now you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. This is America is brought to you by the National Education Association, the nation's largest advocate for children and public education. The Republic of Kazakhstan in the heart of Eurasia, a rich history, a culture of hospitality, and a future of development and growth. The U.S.-China Education Trust and the F.Y. Chang Foundation. The League of Arab States, representing 350 million people in 22 member countries. The Rotondaro Family Trust. The Embassy Series, uniting people through musical diplomacy, presenting international artists in diplomatic settings.